Hello and welcome back. My name's Ben. I'm an alcoholic. So this is the third part of Foreward to the second edition featuring my friend Jim. So we were on page XVII, which is 18 in Roman numerals, and we'll be starting at our society, but first we're going to go back and unpack some content in the previous paragraph. So Jim, you want to start us off on that?
Thank you. When it talks about the dinner that was John D. Rockefeller Jr., like I said earlier, the Oxford movement, they catered to the elite, even in New York. One of Herbert Hoover's staff members was a member of the Oxford group, and he in turn was a friend of Rockefeller's, and they were allowed to have this dinner for Alcoholics Anonymous, and they were going to, naturally, Bill, being the promoter that he was all excited about it, you know. And he knew they was going to get thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But turned out, though, that after they had the dinner and they had some AA members who gave their story, John D. Rockefeller, with his wisdom, gave Alcoholics Anonymous $5,000. That was it. He said, money will ruin this. You know?
Wow.
Yeah. And so the point is, with his wisdom, you know, that's why we have the seventh tradition today.
That's profound.
Yeah. And but anyway, go back to Jack Alexander. Jack Alexander, back in the 20s and 30s, he had his own radio show. And if Jack Alexander showed up to your door, it'd been like the early 60 Minutes showing up to your door. Oh. He was an investigative reporter. Well, he had heard about this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and he went there to get the angle, to see what was wrong with it. You know, it's to see how he could, you know, and he followed Bill through Philadelphia and New York for almost a month. And his report was, in this article, there was nothing wrong with it.
Wow.
It was all about service to other alcoholics. You know, he could not find there was no angle. You know, and but for him though, especially being a investigative reporter, you know, he could not find one thing wrong with it. You know. So that was when I said from there, for that article, it went from 800 to 8,000. You know, so.
That's incredible.
Now you tell me, is that odd or is that God? Yeah.
So then it says, our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this. Could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? And what that means to me is just unpredictable.
Yep.
Unpredictable alcoholics. It says, would there be fights over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms, which is divisions? Would there be divisions which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene.
As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. Now here's basically the format of the 12 traditions. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society. Tradition 3, that our leaders might serve but never govern. Tradition 1, each group would be autonomous and there was to be no professional class of therapy. Traditions 4 and 8. They were in no fees or dues. Tradition 7, our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization in our service centers, Tradition 9. Our public relations policy was to be based on attraction rather than promotion, Tradition 10. It was decided that our members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and film, Tradition 11, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter into public controversies, Tradition 6. Wow. And right there is the foundation, because we realize, how could it possibly be that when you have self-centered, egocentric people coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, and they want their work to their own agenda? This is why this is as spiritual as the steps themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I think that's great that they the way it's laid out here too, how it talks about the divisions, the problems and all this stuff, the prestige, the striving for power, fights over membership, leadership, money, all this stuff. And then they solve it with their traditions. And like you were just talking about, I think it's beautiful the way they lay it out like that.
seriously.
So it says, this was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has.
Exactly.
And that is the darn truth.
And I'll go back to what I said. I mean, you learn that the traditions are just as spiritual as the steps,
Absolutely.
because it teaches us how to. The steps teaches us action. The traditions teaches us interaction.
Oh, I like that. I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah, and so the point is, it teaches us how the steps keeps us away from suicide. Our traditions keeps us away from homicide.
Yep. I heard that one. That's a good one. And for anybody who's wanting to go through the traditions, we'll be doing that at a later date on here. So hang tight.
Yep.
Those will come. So then it says, while the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons. Obviously, one, the large numbers of recoveries, and then also reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. So we're going to really buckle down on the rest of this paragraph. It said, and really unpack a lot. So I'm going to read through it, and then we'll really open up on it.
Sure.
It says, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, half got sober at once and remained that way. Another 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. There are thousands who came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed.
Wow.
Jim, I'm going to let you start with
Thank
that.
you. You know what? Think about this. Remember, this was still early in the fellowship, when the fellowship was still new. Sure, we had 8,000 people, maybe 10,000 at that time, but it was scattered. It was a privilege to go to a meeting. It was an actual privilege to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And people took the steps seriously. They took the book seriously because they knew that's the way they got sober. Okay? So with that in mind, of alcoholics who came and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. I'm also one of them. All right. But anyway, it says here that of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses. And among the remainder, those who stayed with AA showed improvement.
And so we could conservatively say that of the remainder, let's just say that's around 5%.
Correct.
So out of all of that so far, 50 plus 25 plus 5 equals 80.
80%. Exactly.
Conservatively.
And see, and that's why I want to emphasize this. I am not anti-treatment center. Treatment centers have their place. Detoxes have their place. But it's unfortunate to watch now how they have basically taken over the 12-step call. I mean, it's been so many years now since I've been on an actual 12-step call. Well, people now, all they want to do is a ride to a detox, or a ride to a treatment center, or a ride to a sober living house. You know, but the point is that, I mean, what we're reading here is when there was very little fellowship, but all we had was the program and the book. 80% sobriety rate. Now they claim it can be anywhere from as low as 10 to 5%. And this thing about relapses, part of recovery, it does not say that one word of that in this book.
Very true.
That all that is treatment center BS. That has been brought into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
You know?
And we'll say that even if it's a quarter, because I relapsed a ton of times.
Sure.
And just to give this a little more credibility, I relapsed until I had somebody take me through the book one-on-one. Now, I'm not saying that that's what caused my sobriety,
Of course.
or that I attribute everything to it.
Right.
But that's my experience. I went to 7 treatment centers. I went to jail. I went to psych wards. I went to a halfway house. I went to everything. I went to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and I am not, of course, as a mental health professional, belittling any of that.
Correct.
All I'm saying is that what worked for me was one man sitting down and taking the time to 12-step me.
Exactly.
And then also, as I worked on a public health master's for a while, and I did a lot of biostats and stuff, and to see round numbers like 50%, 25% is exceedingly rare. So I don't know how they pulled these numbers. And I don't know where they came up with them, but from my experience, when I've taken people through the book, they, by and large, get sober. It would probably be somewhere around 4 out of 5 people.
Exactly.
Some of them relapse, but most of them stay on.
Exactly.
And so regardless of how perfect those numbers may seem and how much of a fairy tale they may seem, my experiences have shown that that's very accurate.
Correct. Exactly.
And so, and that number is extremely higher than what, Dr. Silkworth had been able to achieve in his, his service as a physician. And we'll talk about that more in the
Doctor's opinion.
Yeah, the doctor's opinion. And so that concludes number 3, part 3 of this. And in the fourth part, we will be concluding forward to the second edition. So thank you greatly, and God bless you.